Today's guest is Daniel Ryan BFA MS. He is the founder of virtual reality near-death experiences.
We call it a virtual reality near-death experience.
Which, as the name sounds like, you can have a virtual reality near-death experience.
The experience is about 13 minutes long. It is a VR virtual reality experience, a near-death experience to be specific, as the title suggests. This is the closest we can imagine even safely simulating this event. And, to get as close as we can is important. The feedback from experiencers was relatively incredible. First on just a personal level. That particular group, it was really touching because oftentimes experiencers would get emotional with it, and it would, through sheer reflection. A lot of people would say it was nothing like my experience, but it was the closest to my experience I've ever had since then.
And now for my conversation with Daniel Ryan.
Hey everyone! I'm really excited to let you know about the Science and Spirituality salons I'm now hosting. During these intimate events, a scientifically verified psychic medium will give all of you readings, and I will give a talk on the science and evidence that changed my mind about an afterlife. This will also be an amazing opportunity to get to meet some of you in person or virtually, and to share more about all the science and data that transformed my worldview and got me through my worst days. These can be hosted in your home, in a nearby cafe with a private room, or they can even be virtual. I've hosted a few already, and they were really special, fascinating, emotional, evidential. So if you're interested in getting a small group together over dinner, brunch, drinks, coffee, to learn more about the science and to get evidential medium readings, send me an email at hello@wtfjusthappened.net and put science and spirituality in the title.
Today I'm speaking with Daniel Ryan, and he is co-founder of Virtual Reality Near-Death Experience. Welcome, Daniel.
Hi, Liz. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. I have to tell you, after I met you at the IONS conference, I did the virtual reality experience there, virtual reality near-death experience. It was such a cool experience, really amazing. So thank you for founding this.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for doing it and saying that. Yeah, anything else that you would be willing or interested to share over the course of our conversation today, I would love to hear. And it doesn't have to be praise either, of course. We are still trying to do this with as many people as possible. So all the feedback is welcome.
Yeah, I don't have any negative feedback. It was just, I don't have anything to compare it with. So I can't
me neither yet,
offer any feedback. So beyond a really good experience. First of all, where did your interest in near-death experiences come about?
Well, the subject of death itself really comes into a kind of, I wouldn't say the center of the frame, but the side of the frame when I was a young person growing up around the subject of past life regression. My father was a regression therapist and a hypnotherapist, and he was, for a time when I was a teenager, so this is going back to the early 90s, he was the president of the Association for Past Life Research and Therapies. And this is a time when past life regression and regression therapy were really still very young. They're still relatively young, but at that time, Brian Weiss's Many Lives, Many Masters, which is still kind of the most popular book out there on the subject, had only recently been published. And a wave of the kind of therapeutic interventions as well as new age methodologies and wellness practices that we're familiar with today, like Well, everything from transcendental meditation to Scientology and their auditing techniques and other stuff that they do, which I don't know much about firsthand. But all of these things kind of had some waves of popularity that went through the 70s, 80s, and 90s that my dad was a part of. And through exposure to these subjects through him, I was in, Liz. I was just kind of I was attracted to the subject matter and the everything kitschy and fun, but also sincerely interesting and therapeutic about the subject matter. And of course, death was just part of the insinuation and suggestions around past life regression and reincarnation and a lot of the ideas in these practices. So I would say the exploration begins really for me then. It isn't until much later in life that it gets more central in the frame, but it starts there.
Interesting. I had no idea that you grew up around so much of this and what your dad did. I'm going to have to ask you more about that later on. And
Please
tell
do.
me if I'm right. You do hypnosis and past life regression therapy as well, correct?
That is correct. It's the family business. I followed in my dad's footsteps ultimately
Mhm.
and have been offering regression therapy and hypnotherapy in New York City now since 2012 in my own private practice. My dad passed away in 2011. So I continued his practice, but also I didn't. He was in New Jersey and was really operating very differently. It was kind of a network and a body of work I took with me more than anything. But yes, you're correct. I carry on the family legacy that way today.
Oof, what an interesting legacy. And I'm sorry about the passing of your dad.
I appreciate that. Thank you. It
Yeah.
was a while
So
ago.
yeah, but it never really goes away. That's what got
That's
me into
true.
this in the first place was losing my dad in 2015. So it still feels like yesterday some days, doesn't it?
Of
At
course,
least to
of
me.
course.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And much like you and this project that we're here together in today, um, I don't want to assume anything, Liz, but I know for me, death was a great catalyst. His death was a great catalyst, among many other things. But
Mhm.
what a catalyst death can be, I suppose.
It was for me too. Yeah.
Mm.
So I'm going to ask you, I'll get more into that later, but
Great.
actually, I will ask you quickly. Have you gotten signs? Do you get communication from your dad?
I appreciate the question.
Mhm.
Um, to tell you the truth, I mean, this answer would have to be yes. I'm laughing, Liz, because I continued the man's work, which is past life regression to begin with. And oftentimes,
Right.
you know, looking at myself through a humorous lens and perhaps a little self-deprecation, my career choices, my vocation, which in one sense seems like really like right vocation in a very wonderful way, but in another sense, perhaps is just me working out my daddy issues through my
Mhm.
professional life over the course of the last X amount of years. And let me tell you, hypnosis and
Mhm.
regression are an excellent opportunity to do just that. Uh,
Right.
so in that way, I mean, all the time, yes, all the
Mhm.
time. But I will also confess, for myself, I there's not really a part of me lately that's looking for, communication from him necessarily. I'm a
Okay.
relatively new father, and I have a
Oh,
toddler at home, a daughter.
congrats.
Yeah, thank you. Who is his granddaughter, So I
Mhm.
think about that more than I think about he and I's relationship more now, which is also quite free.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. I definitely want kids someday, and I think probably something about the continuing the family line, or the way they say your parents are really, or your relatives who've passed are really with you when you
Yeah.
have children.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so now let's get into virtual NDEs. Do you want to tell our listeners a bit about what the virtual NDE? Sorry, I'm not properly. What remind me of
It's
the
okay.
proper name?
Yeah, we call it a virtual reality near-death experience.
Virtual reality near death experience.
The
Okay.
website is virtualnde.org. Um, The experience is about 13 minutes long. It is a VR virtual reality experience, a near-death experience to be specific, as the title suggests. And what it is, and what you experienced at the conference last August, we created with three intentions, really, that I boiled down to. One as a death education tool, a second as a death acceptance tool, and the third as a novelty and a piece of entertainment that would also be interesting, kind of fun, not too upsetting, cinematic at the right moments, and hopefully a little heart opening too. So we set out to create this thing. There was really five of us on the team that did that particular experience. Myself, my co-creator Virgil Wong, who is a absolutely totally wonderful guy, close friend of mine, and the real source of the project. He was the first one that said to himself, "You know what? I'm going to create a virtual reality near-death experience." And then I was the second person to come onto the project. And then three people at the International Association for Near Death Studies: Daniel Endy, Bob Copps, and Evan Meacham. Love those guys. Absolutely incredible. And they really helped us create what I consider to be a greatest hits of the stations of near death experiences as we know them, and what is said to happen in a potential near death experience through a kind of collected wisdom of the stories that have happened so far. We couldn't possibly represent everyone, nor could we possibly even accurately represent one. So we had to synthesize together and ask at a couple times, which presented what I still consider to be interesting cinematic challenges too. Um, I think it ultimately is more of a kind of artistic project than a scientific one at the end of the day, although there is a great deal of effort and a sincere um, effort and desire to, as accurately, I'll put that in air quotes, but as accurately as possible portray what the actuality of the experience can be. So, yeah, over the course of 2024, the five of us were meeting over Zoom and sculpting this experience together. And the end project, I contributed, and the end result, I contributed the music. The voiceover is me. The parts that aren't me are actually me with AI manipulation. And the five of us really co-created the script while Daniel Endy operated as a kind of script supervisor and bringing the whole thing home and into a kind of cohesion, which he did so wonderfully. And yeah, so that's a little bit about that project to start.
So have any of you, of the five of you,
Hmm.
had a near-death experience?
I don't want to speak for the other guys. I don't know how specifically Daniel, Bob, and Evan would answer that question,
Mhm.
whether it would be a yes or a no or something else. Um, for me, the answer is no. I don't consider myself an experiencer. I'm a psychonaut. I will claim that. And again, have worked, as we'll continue talking about today, and what I consider to be neighboring and adjacent subjects for years, for the better part of my life. So the subject doesn't feel unfamiliar to me. And in fact, I consider myself really fortunate to have been, at times, it seems, accidentally put in a position where I could directly work with and talk about and think about these kinds of things around near death experiences and have the opportunity to talk with experiencers. So, long answer to your question. For me, no. I think Virgil's answer is also no. But the other three guys I don't want to speak for.
Yeah. No, I know. I don't think Bob Cups has had one. He's been a guest on here and he talked about
Mm,
other experiences. So, but yeah, I don't know
yes.
about the others. But again, yeah, it's probably best to let people speak for themselves. Now, when did you first come up with this idea? And I know you talked a bit about past life regression in your
Hmm.
family, but How did you, I guess, let me back up. First, how did you start hearing about near-death experiences? And then how did that lead into you coming up with this idea?
So near-death experiences, again, were really what I would consider an adjacent or kind of orbiting subject around what I was focused on more centrally and intentionally, which were hypnosis, which is a huge subject, and then also
Mhm.
regression therapy, which is a smaller kind of sub niche within the larger subject of hypnotherapy or clinical hypnosis. Uh, it's, I think, 2022, maybe 21, but around COVID and around when we were all inside.
Yeah.
Virgil, wonderful man that he is, I was fortunate enough that he signed up for a class that I was offering called Past Life Regression and Death Positivity, I think is what it was called.
Mm.
But it was exploring how, in past life regression, as we are working with what may or may not be memories of past lifetimes, we are certainly kind of engaging with, metaphorically or otherwise, cycles of life inside of our lives and inside of us. And death is very clearly part of that process, life, death, and rebirth, et cetera, et cetera. So past life regression, it was always kind of evident to me, was this opportunity to also explore death positivity through the very suggestion of reincarnation. Again, we can kind of consider it metaphorically even, but it does completely reframe almost instantly our normal, I'll speak for myself, my American, westernized, modern, death phobic upbringing, that is steeped in
Mhm.
death denial and health as death prevention and always
Yeah.
kind of sweeping away the inevitable and look over here,
Mhm.
et cetera, et cetera. Um, so Virgil signed up for my class. He told me about his project. And again, I don't want to speak for him, but he's such a wonderful soul. Among his different titles, he's a digital health technologist and an artist, and is very comfortable and works with directly all the time health technology in various ways. And one of those ways of facilitating that for him has been virtual reality. So it's a language that he's very comfortable in. And he was the one, through his own difficulty, I don't know if it was a grief process or just kind of confronting the incomprehensibility of death, but he decided on his own that he was just going to make a virtual reality near death experience.
Hmm.
And then went, as I understand
Interesting.
it, and studied Bruce Grayson and Rick Moody and Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and got the kind of beginnings of what the experience was, put it online, put it out there, got some feedback around it, but it was just kind of a novelty that lived online. I thought it was awesome. It's the kind of thing I'm into. So I was like, hey, can I help you? And
Yeah. Yeah.
and then he was like, yeah, I'd love that. And I was like, I've done some voiceover work before. I'd be happy to give you some VO or, however I can contribute. Got some music we could put together. So it became he and we got like a rough V2 together and put that
What's a
online.
V2?
Oh, a version 2, like a 2.0.
Version 2. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a second iteration of the project. And then IANS, the International Association for Near Death Studies, I think they found Virgil and the project organically online and contacted us, and we generated a relationship with them. And then they helped produce and got on board and really made this most recent iteration possible that's now being adapted into another language. And yeah, and that we're very proud of. It's really the first thing of its kind and it seems to have generated, Liz, a lot of enthusiasm to do more things like it. I don't know who's going to take that and run with it. I don't even know if it's going to be me, for instance. But
Mhm.
but it does seem to have, when people engage with it, the response, it's very positive. Um, I think VR is still generally a very prohibitive technology that most people don't have access to and find uncomfortable. So I
Mhm.
think that that's a big problem ultimately, and that it will always kind of limit the audience. But for what it is, and for those that are interested and can engage with it, yeah, the response has been really wonderful.
Yeah. I mean, again, I had a wonderful experience. It's
I'm so
probably
glad.
Thank you. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd say it's probably the closest way I could experience a near death experience without putting myself in danger. I mean, there are other ways I could do it, but I'm not too willing to take the risk, you know?
And nor
So,
should you be. Yeah,
right,
no, I
right.
appreciate you saying that because I agree. And that part of it also is just kind of compelling in its own way,
Hmm.
I think, too, that this is the closest we can imagine even safely simulating this event.
Yeah.
And, to get as close as we can is important.
I mean, maybe one day medicine will be so good and it would I mean, how are they even going to test it to this extent where like you stop people's hearts and bodies and it's totally safe, and you could be stopped and frozen for 2 days and come back. I don't know. I mean, that would be given the what would your thoughts be on that? I was about to say mine, but I'd actually like to hear yours first.
Well, I think it gets science fiction-y really fast.
Hmm.
And the attitude and the mixing together of our godlike modern technology, healthcare technology where it currently exists, and capitalism in the US as it currently exists. Not that I'm anti-capitalist, I essentially am a
Hmm.
capitalist. But
Hmm.
but all of those forces mixing together, my thought is that um, kind of like the Joel Schumacher 1980s hit Flatliners that was remade into a movie I never saw the second version of, but it would be irresponsible at first. I think
Okay.
I think it would have to require a kind of reorienting to death
Hmm.
in the first place, because what you're making me think of is about the possibility of, gosh, some fountain of youth existing in the field of death that we currently deny and don't want to look at because we are generally, kind of steeped in death phobia from
Hmm.
the very beginning. So a reorienting of that and to look at the experience as generative, to start with. And then I think, technology and science would probably cause a lot of harm trying to turn that into a product or service that can be replicated and, I don't know what, sold back to us in some way that was free to us yesterday.
Okay. Yeah, I hadn't
What are your
quite thought of
thoughts?
it. Oh, it's probably good I'm not a scientist because I'm like, would probably be reckless. I'm like, let's try everything scientific.
I
Like
know, I
when
know.
I'm in my
And
80s, I'm like, I'll be the first one going into outer space once it's recreational. I wouldn't do it yet. I'd want to be older just in case. But yeah, I would. I also hadn't thought of it in terms of capitalists, but if they made it insanely expensive, so it was only for the absolute elite, I actually think that'd be a great thing. They say how, at least initially, because think how people change after a near death experience. So you put all the
mm,
people in power to go have a near death experience, that would profoundly change the world. Let's say it was like millions of dollars to do it. And Elon Musk was like, let's go do it. And other, Trump, people really with a lot of money hurting our world. And people with like, yeah, I think if all the billionaires went and did it, it might be fantastic.
it might be. There's no guarantee you're going to come back from it a better version of yourself, from what I understand. You know,
Really?
uh,
Okay. I
there
hear
are,
I thought all near death experiences, I thought that was like a consistency or
not to my understanding, actually.
hmm.
Yeah, not
Okay.
to my understanding. As I understand it, the negative or fearful stories around near death
Mm.
experiences and the explorations of what are sometimes referred to as hell realms are
Mm.
also rather common, but they don't
Hmm.
get as much press or as much play because they
Right.
aren't as inspiring. They aren't necessarily the stories that we want to hear either, but they do happen quite a lot. And that,
Okay.
oftentimes people come back from NDEs really fucked up and shaken up by the experience, and they can't operate in their relationships and in their jobs the way that they used to. and integrating and processing what happened is really difficult, and the mood swings and hormonal stuff and everything. So it's just very dysregulating and throws things out of balance. But it's all over the spectrum, really, as I understand it. Liz, it's like positive, negative, and neutral, and everyone's kind of different. It's very case by case.
Mm. I guess I mean, yeah, the negative ones do frighten me, but I have my
Yeah,
theory
me
on
too.
those. Yeah. I've heard they're only like 2% of the experiences though, but maybe it's because people don't want to talk about them if after they happen. But yeah, they're scared. What are your thoughts on them? Do you have any thoughts on them?
Well, I can't help but also think of the spectrum of possibilities and psychedelic experiences, and that some are blissful and some are
Mhm.
hellish, and some are, very
Mhm.
heart opening and loving and visual, and others are very inward and dark and shadowy.
Mhm.
So there's a kind of consistency amongst non-ordinary experiences, whether it's NDEs, psychedelics, even certain hypnotic experiences or channeling experiences. So I think just in general, the whole spectrum is available to us. Yeah, and every nervous system is so unique too. My hell realms would almost certainly be different than yours, different than somebody else's, and as well as any visitations that I would have with the ancestors and the angels and the guides and all that too. It's like a comedy routine or something. Even the idea that I go into a near-death experience, but I meet with your guides, and
Mhm.
they're like, "Wait, aren't you Liz?" And I'm like, "No, I'm Dan. Who are you? Why are you expecting Liz?" And so all that is a way of saying I don't know.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yeah.
but it does remind me of just again the kind of spectrum experiences we have throughout these non-ordinary realms.
And through ordinary. I mean, I guess they're probably
Yes,
all
agreed.
ordinary if they're real, but this is just the material of our ordinary. Probably once we're in non physical, it's just as ordinary to us as here. Moments of magic, moments of dullness, moments of misery. I mean, my hell here could be someone else's idea of heaven. So, in that sense, when people hear things like that, it makes them say, oh, this can't be real. But then it's the exact same thing here. And I guess that's how I make sense too of negative NDEs. I have had gone on like not like nice vacations, but like kind of slightly rigorous volunteer programs or like first days of places where my first day or my getting there, I am miserable. I'm like, get me home. This is horrifying. And I end up having some of the best times in my life. So I sometimes think that
Mm,
with NDEs, or like I'll have horrible, like almost unlivable agony times of my life here and also wonderful. So I think there's this fear that people have that if you step into something horrible during an NDE or hellacious, that means that's your eternity. And that's why
mm.
I'll just be like, you know what? Having a bad day, even having a bad life doesn't, with all the evidence now that it continues, that doesn't mean eternity is hell.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. The binary of
Hmm.
heaven or hell,
Hmm.
feels to me,
Hmm.
without commenting on any kind of religious points of view on
Yeah.
heaven or
Yeah.
hell, but that
Yeah.
binary to me feels like most binaries, from what I hear, pretty false.
Yeah. I would agree. I just think, yeah, almost everything's more nuanced than that.
Yeah,
But so I'd like to get back a little bit to the virtual NDEs. That was a very
please.
interesting kind of philosophical twist. Now, how do you assess for accuracy? You're not an experiencer. You know, how did you get information that it was as close to an NDE as possibly could be simulated?
Yeah, appreciated. With respect to the actuality of people's experiences and the experiencers whose stories we discussed and referenced, we we had to accept early on that we weren't going to be able to achieve what I would call any kind of accuracy, in any
Hmm.
realistic terms. Uh, Again, narratively and honesty might be a more accurate word for what we were trying to achieve and aiming for. And that we wanted to represent the again honestly the actuality of what it could be through
Mhm.
stories that have happened and that are recorded. But we also didn't want to freak people out. One of the biggest challenges that we spent the most time with, as I recall, was initially, and by the way, just anybody listening, this is on YouTube. You can totally access it right now. Please, virtual reality near death experience will bring it to you, or again, virtualnde.org is the website. Yeah.
Mhm.
And it's the audio of it can totally be engaged with as a kind of guided meditation if you just want to listen to it, and the visuals are there
Mhm.
to support you if you want and to check out
Mhm.
what it looks like. But the experience itself, for instance, starts with a car crash. That's how we simulate the death and the near death experience. And we were talking about how are we going to, you know, essentially kill a person in a car crash in the first couple minutes of this thing and not traumatize. But what if somebody's been in a car crash recently?
Right.
So we really wanted to approach the material as sensitively as possible. We didn't want to re-traumatize anybody. We had a sensitivity to that as we were working. We wanted to honestly depict a car crash, and these presented again as cinematic challenges as much as they were challenges in accurately portraying what could be the NDE itself. So each moment had this kind of thing attached to it, and a certain set of questions that maybe changed a little bit from one moment to the next. Um, yeah, so it wasn't quite accuracy, to answer your question, that we
Mhm.
were always concerned with. We were, I would say, looking back on it today, honesty again is a kind of closer word, in that we were trying to honestly depict what we were interpreting and reading about in the stories, and again, kind of synthesizing a greatest hits as best as we could.
I know a lot of you have heard me talk about the Forever Family Foundation. They were absolutely instrumental in helping my grief and in changing my view of the probability of an afterlife. They use science based testing to certify psychic mediums, have a scientific advisory board, and they host grief retreats. They will be hosting a special grief retreat this October in California only for parents who have lost a child. The founders, Fran and Bob Ginsberg, who've become like parents to me, although Fran sadly passed in 2020, started the foundation after the passing of their daughter, Bailey, so helping grieving parents is dear to their hearts. This retreat will have psychic mediums and speakers. While they host many grief retreats during the year, having been through it themselves, they understand the unique type of grief and the safe environment needed for those who have lost a child. For more information and to sign up, go to foreverfamilyfoundation.org. I'll also have the link to this retreat in the show notes. Did you get any feedback ever from experiencers, like at the
Oh
conference
yeah.
or in research? Okay, I'm curious. What
Oh,
have
yeah.
experience and near-death experiencers had to say about it?
Yeah, so I wrote a proposal for a qualitative study around this at Columbia not
Mhm.
too long ago. We'll see if it goes somewhere. But the feedback from experiencers was relatively incredible. First on just a personal level,
Mhm.
uh, that particular group, it was really touching because
Mhm.
oftentimes experiencers would get emotional with it, and it would through sheer reflection. A lot of people would say it was nothing like my experience, but it was the closest to my experience I've ever had since then.
Mhm.
And it gave me something to compare it to, which I've never had before. And what was even more powerful is, and this is what I think the study should be done around, is people that came to the conference with family members, and both family members did it. And what we heard in a couple cases was that the VRNDE was the first and best opportunity that they had ever had to understand what their family member went through. and that
Wow.
they never had a way before of thinking about or experiencing what their brother or their father or their mother went through, let alone talk about it and, come together and have a platform to say, did you experience it like that, or did you experience it like this? And again, to have a reference point together that they could talk about it through. And that created so many possibilities, and it just opened up so many portals and doors that we weren't able to move through or really work with at that time. Um, but that's what I've focused on in the proposal that I wrote, which again has a lot of enthusiasm behind it, but we'll see. It's not a great time for funding, so we'll see what happens
Oh.
there. But yeah, that was really the most powerful kind of feedback that we received, and what stays with me a lot, what Virgil and I certainly still talk about, uh, and I would love to have the resources and the ability to do more of it.
That would be a wonderful study. Did you speak at all with Philip Hascheider and Mary Hascheider, his wife? Because they gave a
Don't think so.
talk. I believe, Philip, he's been a guest here and he had a near death
Mm,
experience. And Mary, his wife, his book about his near death experience talked a lot about Mary's experience as his wife. And I believe at the last IONS conference, she gave a talk on the experience of being a family member of a near death experiencer and
mm,
gave that
mm.
talk for the families. So that might be a person you might want. I
Beautiful.
can
Yeah, thank you. I
Sure, I can
appreciate
give
that.
you his info after this.
Thank you.
So sure. Yeah, that's kind of what I expected and sounds amazing that near death experiencers said it was. Yeah, as I said at the beginning, my impression is it's the closest way you can experience a near death experience without risking your life and
That's it.
having,
And
yeah.
yeah, yeah, which
Um,
is which is kind of a low bar too. There's definitely room. I'm proud of what we did, but there's definitely room to raise that bar a little bit still.
do you
Sorry, I
think
interrupted.
so? Oh no,
Oh, I
no.
think so.
How could that be? Well, I can't even picture how you could do it further.
Well, I think the experience can be iterated on
Hmm.
further, ultimately. Certain things that we've talked about in terms of possibilities. For instance, looking at this one, and a lot of this could no doubt be created, probably be pretty awesome too, through current tools available, animation.
Hmm.
Hopefully a human can do it, but then we know AI can do it. But
Right.
So, this was a kind of synthesized greatest hits of many different NDEs that we sculpted into a particular narrative.
Hmm.
One could create an organization like IANS, for instance, could start creating a library of these experiences that
Mm.
coincide to people who were willing to sign off on sharing their experience. Here's Bob D. from Delaware's NDE that he had in 1997, played out in either a two-dimensional video or potentially a VR experience. Here's Carol S.'s experience that she had in 2003. Here's Phyllis's experience that she had in 1994. So we've just talked a lot about the different kind of narrative possibilities of building out a library of these experiences and how it could be iterated on. There's a lot of possibilities. It's one of the key things, and one of the things that I think is the most fun about this. And it was just sitting there as pretty low hanging fruit, but there's nothing else out there like this that really exists. There's nobody doing this. There's not a big competition at the moment. Um, if anything, I hope that we'll be able to say in the rearview mirror that this helped again catalyze more of this kind of thing.
Right. And now I remember during it, you also touched upon this is that you discussed and used and kind of simulated some people's actual near death experiences. And I guess kind of an amalgam of those. How did you select the ones that you selected?
I can't answer that as well as I wish I could. We really leaned on Bob and Evan and Daniel and
Hmm.
IANS and their resources, and would ask them directly what stories, what feels important at the beginning, what feels important at the end, what feels important in the middle. And Virgil and I really leaned on their expertise and the voluminous stories that they have available and the knowledge that they have. So I give them credit for really, again, narratively steering us. Um, yeah, and I couldn't. I mean, there's a couple in the background, but there isn't really one particular story I can point to and be like, this one influenced us the most. It really is a blend of many stories.
And is there an NDE you've heard of that you think's most amazing?
Huh. It's a fun question. Gosh, I bet there is, but there's not a particular one coming to mind as we're speaking now. Um,
Nice.
yeah, yeah, I'll let you know if one comes up, but there isn't one coming to mind so much. It is what I find more entertaining at this stage is kind of those, as mentioning like a comedy routine before of, me popping into somebody else's life review and being like, wait a second, I didn't do this with me. Uh,
Has that ever happened that you've heard
well,
of?
exactly.
I don't know if
No,
I've ever heard of
it hasn't. It
it.
hasn't happened to my knowledge, which
Mhm,
again, as we try to imagine the afterlife as a system
mhm,
or a conveyor belt of souls or something, and whatever process takes place in between lives,
mhm.
um, that is kind of yeah. Again, I play with those possibilities in my own imagination right now. Again, this is not a scientific exploration at this time, but just looking at what is consistent about these things and what actually just doesn't happen, what never happens. And there's a lot of things that don't happen in NDEs.
But don't happen. What do you mean?
Correct. Well, I mean, for instance, like we're pointing out,
Okay.
it doesn't happen that my spirit is gravitationally pulled into another nervous system. It
Right.
doesn't have, that, and experiencers will say, and I really appreciate this statement, that an NDE is not a neurological event.
Mhm.
That an NDE is not simply the brain or the chemistry expressing itself and doing what it does as the body or the pulse slowly die or something like this, that it is more than a corporeal event. It is, at the least physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. And yet that said, my spirit or whatever Dan is, if I were to have an NDE, you know, I have never heard of, and I don't think would happen that, I would suddenly be brought into somebody else's, like I'm joking around about somebody
Right.
else's life review or somebody else's set of memories or somebody else's relationships or marriage or,
Mhm.
upset over their children or something like that. Um, so yeah.
I do. I actually have a joke, not so different than yours. I always say, oh, I want to master out of body experiences before Trump dies so I can watch his NDE and just drink wine, eat popcorn, and laugh as he has his life review and watch him hopefully being like, oh shit. Maybe he'll be like, yeah, I did hurt that person. Maybe he like won't even get, as you said, people don't always become better during their NDEs, but I don't know. Seems like everyone I read about of a life review, people felt some shame for the bad things that us, normal people who do some normal good, normal bad feel. So I'm
Well,
like, I
that's
want to
another
have my
thing.
popcorn for his.
I hear you. I mean, that's another thing that generally doesn't happen in a life review is when you go before the panel of judges or whatever it is that's taking place there. It's like, nobody's ever like, oh, I did great. No notes, no feedback. Perfect. Nailed it.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at this facetiously and with a sense of humor more than anything else. But there is also a kind of sincere observation of, and it's a question, it's a curiosity, it's a wondering, why is that? What is the limitation that we're looking at there as we talk about how the life review happens, which is a relatively consistent part of NDEs.
Yeah. And so I guess just if any of you listeners, if we have some new listeners who might not know what a life review is, do you want to just explain that? I
Of
think
course,
most,
yeah, thank you.
yeah.
Yeah, the life
Yeah.
review, as the name kind of suggests, which is also something, it's a moment that might be utilized or constructed in regression therapy or certain other spiritual experiences, but is ultimately when a subject, a person, a client, the person receiving the experience or in the experience, the experiencer of the NDE, in the case of near-death experiencers, will feel that they're going before what is considered some kind of authoritative entity or body of entities or body of, fill in the blank. It can be guides, it can be ancestors, it can be angels. These take on a lot of different forms and a lot of different vocabulary, but ultimately, it usually is this sense of, well, judgment in a way, a judgment, and that can be gentle or it can be not gentle. Uh, but as it is happening, one has a life review where, as the name suggests, their life is reviewed. And
Mhm.
it's the life flashing before the eyes moment that we hear a lot about. It's dramatized a thousand different ways. It's when we are flooded with our own memories and look into our partner's eyes and our children's eyes and our parents' eyes and remember what we did wrong, remember what we did right. And, it happens supposedly in an absolute flash, which again, sometimes gets talked about and how fast the brain can process certain information, but it's not a neurological event, but there is the brain that's doing something. So, all of these things happening at once, the life review is this moment that will happen in a lot of near death experiences that usually takes on some version of what I'm describing here, with some of the parts maybe shuffled around, but it is where we do this review. And like you said, Liz, most of the time, the result, it's not always positive. It isn't always like heartwarming and simple. Sometimes it's
Mhm.
very complicated. But it usually is this call to action. If the person recovers from their NDE, it usually does have in it this message of, you know, fill in the blank and take a lot of different forms. It can be a source of purpose for the experiencer, but it can also be a great burden. It can be both. So, yeah, that's a little bit about the life review.
Yeah. And from what I heard, it's not like shaming, like you're in trouble, the way like fundamentalist religious people might view it, but you actually experience the feelings from other
Mm,
people's perspective or other animals' perspectives that you made them feel positive,
yes.
negative, and you feel great joy at love you gave and helping. And yeah. So,
Yeah, the experiencing of how you made others feel is a hallmark of it.
mhm.
Thank you. Yeah.
And the impact. Um, is there, I'd love to talk to you about some of the hypnosis and past life
Please.
hypnosis. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you began doing that yourself in 2011 after the passing of your father. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's when I began my practice. I really consider 2012 the
Mhm.
first year, but that's
2012.
when the transition took place. And um, that's when I decided that I was going to open up my own practice and move things into the city from New Jersey.
Mhm.
So, yeah, everything really came together over the course of 2011, but I consider 2012 my first year of private practice, really.
Amazing. Okay. So I have questions about that. First of all, I'm curious at your thoughts on like some of the past life research. Do you follow like
Hmm.
Dr. Jim Tucker and Dr.
Oh,
Ian
yeah.
Stevenson? Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, I've had
they're
some conversations with Dr. Tucker. Um,
amazing.
yeah, I'm a huge fan. I love their work. And, they really taught me too and helped guide me towards this, which I'm very grateful for clarity around the subject too, that this might help us a little bit. But they told me, Dr. Tucker specifically, that at the University of Virginia, where he works and heads up the Division of Perceptual Studies, where they're doing a lot of this work that we're talking about around reincarnation, and specifically children who will remember past lifetimes and
Mhm.
remember details with terrific clarity that's then fact checked and verified. They don't. work with or consider past life regression or regression therapy a good tool for proving or disproving the afterlife,
Mhm.
because it is too emotionally driven, it's too biased, it's too unconsciously driven. It is always, you know, deeply influenced by the hypnotist or the therapist guiding the experience. So all of these factors combined, they don't really regard regression as a tool for proving or disproving the afterlife, and neither do I. And it's not what
Okay.
I'm trying to do. It's not what I do. Regression therapy and past life regression were formally constructed as interventions, as therapies going back to the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And, uh, I agree with them that it is mostly an art form. It is
Okay.
mostly an art form. It's certainly a therapy, and less so, and perhaps not at all, a kind of scientific tool for proving or disproving the afterlife. Now, that said, just to finish this thread, there are studies on kids who remember past lifetimes and then they fact check those stories and find them to be true. That's the shit right there. Like, why are we not just talking about that? That's one of those things where it's like, stop everything else. What's going on here? Why are we not just asking and figuring out what is going on with this? And that to me is far and away, the most compelling, what we might call evidence of reincarnation or cycles of life and the way we're kind of talking about it. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
and is totally fascinating and compelling to me. But those experiences really are different from, and should be considered very different from, what I do for a living or past life regression.
I first of all will say I completely agree with you about Dr. Jim Tucker and Ian Stevenson's research. It was the first research and evidence I found after my dad passed that gave me hope there could be an
Mm,
afterlife. And I was like,
mm,
this is the most remarkable research. And I also didn't understand how everything wasn't just stopping, how the whole world wasn't
right?
like, wait, what is going on? So, and I
Yeah,
still have that question a bit.
me too.
And yeah. Now, so then what you do it for a purpose of therapy, like healing, trying to figure out why people have phobias, or like what is your purpose with what you do?
Well, it is to be useful, ultimately. You're
Mhm,
right.
yeah.
The therapeutic intervention itself is there as a tool and to be
Mhm,
useful to people. Some people will engage with past life regression or contact me just curious about it as a kind of novelty or as a general
mhm,
curiosity. And I would say that there are ways, this isn't true of all therapies, but in the case of past life regression, because it is really also, from another frame, it's a certain kind of guided thought experiment. It's a guided daydream. It is a novelty and it's experiential. So, all that is a way of saying there are ways of safely engaging with past life regression that are introductory and just a curiosity and a kind of novelty for people who are just curious and don't want to have to, go through what can be the emotional work of a therapeutic session.
mhm,
But that said, it is one of the only tools. I recognized this when I was a kid, by the way, Liz, and this is
mhm,
has compelled me so much. I think it has more to do with the fact that I still do it today than I even realize. But past life regression and the experience of it is one of the few tools we have on earth that will allow us to, at least again in this part of the world, ask, answer, and explore our spiritual questions and challenges in a secular frame that is open and friendly to any and all cultures and religious backgrounds, that can be zoomed out from and engaged with totally metaphorically or as sincerely as one would like, but is looking at and working with these cycles of life in us. Again, coming back to reincarnation and life, death, and rebirth, there's a Voltaire quote where he says, "It's not strange that we would live more than once. Everything in nature is resurrection." And I like this quote very much. I think that, it pretty neatly summarizes how I feel about reincarnation and the evidence for it, or that is all around us. Not claiming that I know how it works or that I know what happens when we die, but the natural world seems to reincarnate pretty easily, and cycles that I think we're part of, etc., etc. All this as a way of saying, as an intervention, as an experience, as a tool, past life regression is incredibly unique, incredibly undervalued, incredibly misunderstood, has terrible PR, which hypnosis does as well, but has such unique and powerful use cases that I was aware of as a kid and saw when I was very young, that I don't know, I just always had this sense of I know what it is and I know what to do with it, which I certainly didn't have about, other things. So for me, that was a big part of why past life regression, feels like something that I can contribute to and use in ways, and perhaps offer in ways that not everybody else could, because the trainings around past life regression therapy, as you might imagine as well, run a gamut of quality and credibility that's pretty wide. So
Right.
that's a long answer to your question. I don't even remember what your question was. I'm just kind of rambling now.
It was the goal of past life
Oh yeah.
regressions if they
Yeah, what is
aren't
the
about
goal?
evidence. Yeah.
Well, again, last thought in response directly to that. Everybody comes for different reasons. Really interesting. A lot of people come to explore purpose, relationships, spiritual
Mhm.
questions. Some people have specific questions about past lifetimes. Um, but and yes, phobias and fearful responses is part of it as well. But I wouldn't even say it's a very large percentage. It's a pretty wide spectrum, and purpose, I would actually say, is the first item on the list there.
And now I have to ask you, I know the goal is not evidence, but have you ever given a regression that ended up being evidential in some way, matched up with a past life, or they knew something that, they couldn't have just known yeah, I don't even know how to ask it exactly. Just have
I
they been
appreciate the
evidential?
question. I know. Um, I would say no. I've
No.
not had that experience. It's evidential of reincarnation in a way that I could point to. But I have had in many sessions non-linear or strange connections, or just I don't want to use the word mystical. I hesitate to use the word mystical because it has so much baggage. But
Okay.
very literally, the experience itself is somewhat mystical. So I've had, that kind of thing happen with regularity. But yeah, nothing evidential that I could point to.
I don't know if you're able to share any, or if that's, a violation of client privacy, but if
No,
it
there's
isn't, is there like one or two that just were the most fascinating, or?
absolutely. Yeah, let me tell you some stories, because the stories are
Okay.
wonderful.
Yeah.
And we can absolutely talk about a few of them without giving confidential information or breaking confidence.
Okay.
Uh, so, one that comes to mind was a woman who came to see me probably almost 10 years ago now. It was a while back, and she was in her 30s at the time. This was in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, where I'm still based. And she was saying that she was a workaholic. She managed a bar a couple nights a week. She, I think, co-owned and managed a shop in the neighborhood as well. She was sending some money home, so there was also a sense of duty and a great
Mhm.
responsibility behind the hours that she
Right.
was putting in and the money that she was generating. Other people were depending on her. Uh, she wanted to take better care of herself. She was also an immigrant here. I don't think she was born in the United States. I'll leave out where she was from exactly, but uh, she was probably here, 5 to 7 years at that time, maybe more, probably more actually.
Mhm.
So, long story short, again, she's coming in for what she's calling workaholism, and she was interested in doing a combination of hypnosis, which is usually actually very direct, despite the reputation of hypnosis. We might think of as a kind of concrete brain training and the positive psychology of how we want to feel during performance, whether that's work, rest, or play. Again, despite the reputation of hypnosis, it's usually and actually quite expansive and grounding and solidifying for people. Whereas past life regression can be more abstract, more impressionistic, more creative, and have to it more of a sense of kind of mystery and creativity. So we're doing a couple sessions. I was maybe our third or fourth session where we're doing a past life regression, and she went into an experience as a camel. Now,
Fascinating.
animal experiences during past life regression actually not that uncommon, usually very, very cool as well, and that they will oftentimes, first of all, immediately again remind us of our intense connections to the animal kingdom and perhaps just being part of the animal kingdom. And then outside of that, these deep symbolic kind of roots that we have in our understanding to these animals. A camel, a very hardworking animal carrying bags back and forth across the desert. Again, her coming in for workaholism, we had this kind of metaphorical layering immediately. When I started asking her more questions, what I discovered was she was not only a camel in this experience, but she was the camel present at the birth of Christ. She was the camel at the nativity scene, seeing Mary and the baby and the wise men and the night sky and the manger and the other animals and the bags that they were carrying. And, it's not even enough to call it an iconic scene, right? It's like something that is so burned into our psyches, this moment. Um, and we all know it from so many different angles and in so many different ways. So for her, she's having these moments with each character there where she's in dialogue with them. She had a whole conversation with Mary about herself, my client herself, as a woman. She didn't say any of it out loud, by the way. I asked her if she was getting what she needed, and she said yes. And she kind of told me that that was happening as she was moving from character to character in the scene. And eventually I asked her, what's the lesson here? What is it we're meant to see? Is there a direction, a purpose, something that you can take from this experience and bring back to your life now? And usually, this is a very important moment in past life regression where we're trying to not necessarily put the experience in a box per se, but extract if there was a meaning here. How does this connect to your present life? What can you take from this and make use of in your relationships tonight, tomorrow? What is the usefulness of this experience? Because we really do, again, want it to be useful. If it doesn't do anything for you, what was the value of it? Uh, so I asked again, what's the lesson here? What is your mind reflecting for itself now? And what came back for her was that she had mistaken nearness to spirituality for self care for a long time. And that this understanding of nearness to spirituality versus the direct experience, that she was ready to take better care of herself and have her own direct experience of her own care.
That's
And I thought that this
interesting.
was, yeah, such a layered and elegant way of somebody telling themselves to take better care of themselves, but also to find the source of energy and the engine that would help them engage with that process habitually and realistically in their lives. And this lesson of the camel present at the birth of Christ, that we as people, this is another absolutely wonderful thing about past life regression and the narratives that emerge. They do have this kind of mythological fable like quality to them where we can extract lessons and meaning, not unlike Aesop's fables or children's stories. And this lesson of the camel present at the birth of Christ, to not mistake nearness to spirituality for a direct experience of ourselves, and that to just be close to something is not to be it. That we can observe, but the observer is not the thing. The observer is the observer. So to have a direct experience, especially when it comes to self care, uh, So that's one story that sticks in my mind, and one that I go back to relatively often, just because I feel it so well kind of illustrates the possibilities with past life regression, not just the sincere and wonderful stuff, but the absolute silliness
Mhm.
that's there with it
Right.
too. Yeah.
Yeah. And do you think a regression like that or other regressions are literal remembrances, or do you think it's our unconscious, like knowing the message we need? Obviously her tied into her workaholism, telling it in a way that you would respond to the most, not you, the individual having the regression, not you, the therapist.
Well, your latter framing there is in a way the goal of all therapy, perhaps.
Right.
To provide one a structure or an experience or a set of steps to reach a source in themselves where they know what they need.
Mm-hmm.
And this idea of physician heal thyself, and the utter fact, I say this as a hypnotherapist engaged with my community here in New York City, and part of it, um, nobody's therapist is living their life for them,
Mm-hmm.
right? And um, I recently read that therapy is friendship and empathy privatized,
Hmm.
and
Interesting.
that fucking enraged me, Liz.
Okay, yeah, I could see
uh,
that.
and
Yeah.
I think, and I mean, I'm being a little sarcastic there. It didn't enrage me, but I did have a strong reaction to it, and I thought about it, and it's implying and pointing towards something that's really important. I think that with more healthy friendships and relationships in our lives, therapy's obsolete. We don't need it. With proper networks and relationships and people that we can open our hearts to and talk about what we're struggling with, and you know have these kinds of, again, relationships. In theory, a therapist shouldn't even be necessary. It should be obsolete. Um,
Mm, I don't know if I agree with that though, because they can be neutral. They can understand seeing blockages that the average person wouldn't recognize, or that someone who cares about you wouldn't recognize. If you want to learn how I went from being a skeptical atheist who thought there was zero chance of an afterlife to a skeptical atheist who thinks an afterlife is highly probable, come check out my books. WTF just happened.
I agree. Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree with that. I agree with that.
Yeah.
It's, I guess what I would respond with is, is that essential, or is that something that is nice to have in a therapeutic relationship? Um, because I would say again, and I don't think there's a right answer here, but
Mm-hmm.
if therapy is friendship and empathy privatized, then in theory, if one can find that for free in their life through other relationships and people, they're not going to need those qualities from their therapist. More usefully and more productively, they would have what you're describing,
Mm-hmm.
a neutral observer that can say, well, hey, maybe this is in your blind spot, or that might be something that you're not totally aware of that could help you. So yeah, but I mean, just like we're talking about, it does kind of throw into the, what's the word? Well, under the microscope therapy again, asking, what is this process for? What are we
Mm-hmm.
engaging with this process for? What are we looking to get out of it, if anything?
That's true. Yeah, and it's probably different at different times. There's, someone who's
Undoubtedly.
feeling like their life isn't developing right, a state, and I think we all go through these stages at different times versus someone
Yeah.
in very early grief. Like you need very different types of therapy and maybe even different therapists at that time.
So true. So true. And I'll
Yeah.
I'll just, put myself in the ring here too. I've got a new therapist in the last couple months who's totally great, who I really like.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, I mean, his name's Andrew Turetsky. I don't think he would mind me shouting him out and giving him a little attention. But
Probably
he's a great
not.
guy. So I mean, just shout out to all the good therapists doing the best they can, because
Yeah,
there's a lot of people in need.
very true. And different therapists are right for different people too. Like The one that could be terrible for
Yeah.
me could be absolutely someone's best therapist, and they could be a very good therapist. It's just how your mind works. Um, well, regarding the camel story you shared, that actually kind of ties into our listener question. I always choose one of the listener questions now for the podcast. And if I can ask you this, let me just read it a second. Rachel Vala, I don't know if you know her, she's involved with IONS. Yeah, she was really curious to ask if, she asked if you know anything about animal reincarnation. You did give an example, but she went also, another part of it was, were animals part of our previous life in some other forms? Have we been animals? I guess you kind of did touch upon this, but I guess the part of her question that wasn't touched upon at all was, could we have been our animals' pets in previous lives? How the animals in our life, how have they tied in our past lives, and will they tie in our future lives? I think I got that right. Just if I asked it literally, it would have a lot of, half of it was already answered. So, Rachel, I hope I
That's
did
great.
right by your question.
That's a great question, Rachel. My personal and professional answer starts kind of with Jung's idea of our collective consciousness and our shared human history that isn't
Mhm,
just human, our shared history that includes, yes, the animal kingdom.
mhm,
And, so my answer is yes. And this corresponds with a lot of different ideas about the afterlife and reincarnation. And I think there's debate and controversy over whether or not to think of it as a kind of hierarchy. The idea, like, am I better because I'm a human? Am I better than my dog? Am I more evolved than my dog? Or is my dog the more evolved species? And is there a hierarchy? Is it a wheel? Is this all just my human need to try to understand it and compress the incomprehensible? So, anyway, again, my personal professional answer is yes. I tend to think that our connections to our animals, I'm looking at my cat to my left at the
mhm.
moment right here.
What's your
Um,
cat's name? I've got to ask.
Emilio. His name's
Aw.
Emilio. Yeah, I can put him on camera if you want.
Yes, yes.
Okay, great.
And for and people just listening, I will put this clip to Emilio on social media. Let me see Emilio. Oh my God. I have Kiwi, who isn't here right now, but I will add a photo of Kiwi too to social media.
Emilio.
Emilio, he's
That's
adorable.
He's a
Oh,
Siberian.
he's
He's handsome and he knows
beautiful.
it. Thank you.
Hi,
Thank you.
hi, Emilio.
So
Okay,
yes, I
so
think I think our relationships to animals are very special, and that
mhm,
we have these links that are spiritual, that
mhm,
go beyond our corporeal bodies for sure. Um, yeah, I guess the most kind of insightful or perhaps direct thing I can point to in my own experience with regression with this kind of thing is really just the consistency of it, and how consistently awesome animal experiences in past life regression are. I remember a group sometime a year or two ago maybe, where there was a man in that group, maybe in his 30s or 40s, somewhere around midlife. He had an experience as a gopher. And the way
oh,
that his
how cool.
experience came about, he was like, I'm underground, but it's okay. And I have this encyclopedic knowledge of this network of tunnels underground, and I know where it all goes, but it's in the dirt. Why is it? And it's like coming together as if he's piecing together clues in his mind that eventually he figures out, oh, I'm a fucking gopher.
Wow.
And once he's like snapped into gopher consciousness, he was having so much fun. This is another thing that's consistent with animal experiences. Generally, again, I don't want to paint with too broad a brush, but generally there is a novelty and a pleasure that goes along with these animal experiences that I think may just tickle our human intelligence or something. I'm not sure what it is, but generally these tend to be lighter, more joy filled experiences for people, even if there's a challenge that the animal is confronted with. Birds, of course, we have this opportunity to experience flying and soaring in our ways that we can't normally access. There was a client of mine who had an experience as a dog, a
Oh,
woman that I was working with who's a friend of mine, and this was probably 13 or 14 years ago now. This was so long ago. But much like the gopher story, she slowly pieced together the fact that she was a dog. She was like, I'm in my front yard, and I know this is my front yard. And had this direct experience of a dog's territorialism and how clearly they know where their house is and where their space is. And then she was like, I could take a nap at any moment, but I also really want to play. I'm very low to the ground. And she kind of like pieced together, she's like, I'm a dog, and then had this completely joyous experience of dog consciousness, that lasted for the duration of that session. So,
amazing.
long story short, these happen all the time. They're generally very fun, very revealing, very insightful, and just constantly reinforce our connections to our animals in the animal kingdom. So it's really it's is what I guess is difficult for me to say that might not usually be said is again the whole idea of the hierarchy or whatever. I don't think we're any better than these animals or anything like that. Um, yeah,
Yeah,
I don't. So it's that part that I'm unsure of.
I would agree with you that I don't think we're better, and might just plug a little one of my ethics here. Like the factory farming of animals is just, I mean,
Mm,
eating wild animals, I do understand. I know I do think animals eat each other. I do eat like, you know, like ethical small farm. People might have
sure,
questions about that, but might not think that's right if they're full vegan or vegetarian. But yeah, the
right.
factory farming, just, people, it's almost treating like animals like they don't have consciousness, I think is maybe hopefully as humans evolve will be something we won't do in the future. I don't know. But
One hopes.
one hopes. Yeah, that's probably one of the causes I care the most about.
Mm,
We are past an hour. Do you have time for one more question or do you have to jump
absolutely.
off?
Yeah. No, please.
Okay. Actually, then I'll do two. First of all, if you could have a near death experience, would you?
No.
No, why not?
Um, far too unpredictable.
Mhm.
I have um, a great deal of respect for death itself, for near-death experiences as a set of experiences, and for experiencers, and the changes I've seen and heard that come from an NDE. Uh, and to be direct, Liz, and I don't think you're doing this or anything like that, to be clear, but the coming back to scary NDEs happen, and fearful stories happen, and they generally don't get as much attention as the nice stories. I think that we might even be close to a situation where NDEs are spoken about so positively and so much focus is given to what might be the truly heartwarming and miraculous stories of things that people bring back from these experiences that we are forgetting and sanitizing the experience and um, placing aside momentarily the fact that we are flirting in a way with death, which is serious fucking business. And for I go back and forth because as a hypnotherapist and as a regression therapist and in my spirit and everything, I want to be experimental and courageous and bold and unafraid and encourage
Mhm.
people to do new things, and we have to. And I genuinely feel that way about all of that. And now as a guy at midlife and a father and every other
Mhm.
thing too. And also, the hypnosis is such a wild subject. There's so many things to talk about with hypnosis. I'm just so conscious of harms and want these things to happen responsibly,
Mhm.
even though we oftentimes I mean genuinely need to push the boundaries of certain things and take a little risk in order to get something valuable out of it. So again, long answer to your question, which I appreciate, but I would have to decline on a near-death experience. I'll just have a sandwich. Thank you very much. I'm good.
Okay. Yeah.
Would you? Same question back to you.
Ooh, yeah. I've been asked this before, and I always wonder if it's going to end up evolving. As of now, it hasn't
Mm,
evolved. Um, I would need some terms. Most of all, yes.
yeah,
But
yeah, that's smart.
most of all, yes. But if it was to be an accident where I would come back permanently disabled or, physiological maiming in some
Hmm.
way, no. If it
Yeah, no
was to
thanks.
be a very long process where maybe I would have a terminal illness for a couple of years that I was struggling with, and then it ended near death experience and returning to life, no. If it was to be a very short illness, if it was to be an accident that I physically fully recovered from, or something like a heart attack, aneurysm, something like that, yes, I would 100% do it. If there is technology, like I haven't seen the movie Flatliners yet. I really
It's
need
fun.
to because, yeah, I feel
It's
like it's
fun.
right up my alley.
Yeah.
If that came out, I wouldn't be in group like one, maybe not even group two. I would be group three. I would do it. I
All
am
right.
so science minded, but my perception of death is, it seems like it's a little, or my experience with death and coming to this is different than yours. I come from like a very materialist upbringing. Zero
Mm,
chance of an afterlife. Zero.
mm,
I thought my whole life. So something even like a bad NDE, I'm like, that would be temporary. That is so much better than eternal obliteration. So I'm like, I'll take like a bad, terrifying, whatever time means there, like week, month, to have then, get some joys again too. So yeah.
okay. Yeah, all
Yeah.
right. Well, when you put it like that, okay.
Yeah. And I will add one part. I said I wouldn't be in the first group, and
Yeah.
maybe my, whatever ends up being elderly, as that seems to be changing with technology, 80s, 90s, I would be in the first group and be, well, once I had grandkids and have lived a lot. Yeah. If my body's like, normal wear and tear of aging and technology hasn't mastered it yet, I would be group
Hmm.
one. I'd be like, let me do that. So,
Nice. All right.
yeah.
Have you
Yeah.
ever done past life regression?
I did one. It was fascinating. I write about it in my first book. I did it with my friend Renee Buck, who
Mm-hmm.
is a psychic medium, and I did it a long time ago. I'd be really open to trying another. I should come on in at some point.
Let me know, please. Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I'd be happy to offer you a session. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, it would be curious to talk on the other side of that again too, Liz, because yeah, we're talking about the VR NDE as the closest certain people can experience. Past life regression, I wouldn't say that about necessarily, but it's just got some interesting parallels in the non-ordinariness. And again, the exploration of death as a character
Yeah.
and the constant kind of presence in our lives and the constant presence of it, in past life regression. It's just an opportunity to, again, engage with the subject in an interesting way.
I should come on. Maybe I'll do it, and then we can come back and do like maybe not a full podcast episode, but like a little Instagram live of my experience or a mini episode.
That'd be great.
Yeah, yeah, I'd be
I'm game for
fascinated.
that. Just let me know. Yeah.
Okay, I'll message you. We'll set up a time. Are you coming to the conference again this year?
I'm hoping to, currently undecided, kind of depends upon family summer scheduling and things like that
Okay,
a little bit, but
okay.
I hope to. We'll see.
Will the technology be there again?
Unclear.
Unclear
Unclear. We'll
too.
find out. Yeah.
Ooh, also, I want you to back me up on one thing. Remember the
Mm.
dance party at the IONS conference? And I
Yes,
have
yes, I do.
told guests that it has the most remarkable, inexplicable sort of like vibrant energy, like joy and feeling all these energies. And I am like come from this from a research, science-based, skeptical perspective. I don't speak that way. So that, and I've talked about the dance party being that way. And I told Daniel this. I said, "Are you coming to the party?" And he kind of looked at me a little when I said the energy things. Like I might have been, you were very polite, but you looked probably how I would have looked if someone said that to me. Like, sure, great. trying to
Yeah,
be nice and being like fucking crazy person, although you were very polite. And then I ran into you at the party and you said, "Oh my God, you are right." Can you back me up on this? You were not expecting that I
100%.
was right. Okay.
100%. I was I don't know what I don't remember what I was expecting, but you were right. We can
Yes.
certainly say that. And the vibe at that conference
Hmm.
was pretty unmatched. I mean, it did remind me of a couple other I'd been to in the past for different subjects and with different groups.
Hmm.
But yeah, it was just everybody was so open and so sweet, and
Hmm.
this isn't a real spectrum or anything, but on a scale of like super scientific and very hard scientific conferences, and other ones that are a little bit more about the abstract and the psychedelic, the nonlinear, not necessarily non-scientific, but more qualitative than quantitative. This was way over on that non-scientific side, but in the best possible way, in my opinion. In my opinion, Liz, and not that there wasn't science there or anything like
Hmm.
that, but and again, just speaking from my experience of it,
Okay.
and what was present at that conference, um, it felt. I mean, the people there were beautiful, and
Yes.
the lion's share of the content, to me, as I experienced, I thought it was mostly people telling and sharing their stories. I didn't
Hmm.
really see much presentation of research papers or anything like that. I saw people sharing and telling their stories, which were usually very heart opening and emotional,
Wow.
and just a ton of people connecting over those stories. And again, experiencers having the opportunity to get down with other experiencers, which seems super cathartic for them. Um, so it was a beautiful conference. It really was. I had a wonderful time.
Yeah. Yeah, that
And that
is
dance floor
true.
was lit up. That dance floor
That's
was lit the
true.
fuck up. Is
Yes.
also the bottom line. Yeah.
Yes, yes. It was like I didn't even drink at it. And like normally I would drink at a dance party and I felt like more
Sure.
high than when I drink. But I will say one thing about you said it's not as science. I think for me who seeks out the science, it had a
Yeah.
lot more science component. I went to every single
Cool.
one that had the most science and research I went to. And I made a point of talking to the researchers and asking research-based questions too. So
I'm
you
glad
can
to hear
have
you say.
both.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you absolutely can. You absolutely
Yeah.
can. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
glad to hear you say that. I didn't have the time to seek that stuff out. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So you can go and have, if you're only interested in the spiritual, more experiential, you can have that. If you're only interested in the science, you can have that. You can kind of, I did a blend. So yeah,
Good.
great. So I guess my last question, is there anything that I haven't asked you that you'd like me to ask you? Anything you feel we didn't touch upon enough?
Nothing comes to mind necessarily. If anything, I would draw people's attention to past life regression, specifically if they're interested in exploring the subject of death or NDEs
Mm-hmm.
from a related but different channel and different way of engaging with the subject. I think that people would find there is quite a lot of overlap and quite a
Mm-hmm.
lot of shared interest in kind of common subject matter, while there also, again, being some very different, aspects of it as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, and outside of that, virtualnde.org, please checking that out and
Mm-hmm.
feeling free to, again, engage with it as an audio experience if you don't have a headset or something like that. And if you're curious about the visuals, they're on the screen for you there. You can also hold up your phone and move it around to have the 360-degree experience. But yeah, would love for people to check that out. And then my website is danielryancrt.com. You
Great.
can
And
find
all
me
that will
there.
be, yeah. And I'll post all that in the show notes. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Liz. I greatly appreciate the time and your hosting today. Thanks for inviting me.
To get more information on what the fuck just happened, go to WTFJustHappened.net. There you can order my book, WTF Just Happened, A Sciencey Skeptic Explores Grief, Healing, and Evidence of an Afterlife. You can learn all about how I came to conclude that there most likely is an afterlife, but you can also learn about the early stages of my grief and the amazing, fascinating people I met along the way. You can read about how much I harassed the mediums and scientists trying to get evidence to see if the mediums were cheating and see if what everyone was saying actually was true. You can also subscribe to our newsletter to stay updated on any new developments and any interesting new what the fuck updates. So if you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. It makes such a difference, especially for a new podcast like this one. And if any of you have had a crazy what the fuck yourself, have any questions, feedback, or just want to say hey, reach out on either Instagram at WTF_just_happened_, or email me at hello@wtfjusthappened.net. I love hearing from all of you. It makes my day hearing your stories and questions and feedback and all of it. And remember, you don't have to draw any final conclusions as you wonder, what the fuck just happened?